I never thought my life would unravel so quickly. My name is Mark, 36 years old, and until recently, I considered myself a lucky man. I had a stable career in construction management, a home I built with my own two hands, and a wife, Evelyn, who I believed was my partner in everything. We met 12 years ago when she was working as an interior designer for one of my projects. Evelyn was the spark in every room, her laugh infectious, her charm undeniable. We got married within 2 years of meeting and built a life together that, to anyone on the outside, seemed perfect. But cracks started to appear. It began subtly, a missed dinner here, a canceled plan there. Evelyn had recently started a new job at a high-end design firm, and her excitement about the position was palpable. She'd gush about her new projects and her boss, a man named Victor. I'd smile, supportive as always, but something about the way she spoke of him made me uneasy. It wasn't jealousy, at least, that's what I told myself, but an instinct I couldn't shake. Late one evening, she came home smelling of a perfume I didn't recognize. "Client meeting," she said, brushing past my questioning look. "Victor took us out to celebrate a new contract." That was the first lie. I didn't know it at the time, but looking back, it was so obvious. A few weeks later, I received a call from her best friend, Laura. Laura was always protective of me, and while she and Evelyn were close, she had no tolerance for dishonesty. "Mark," she started, her voice hesitant, "there's something you need to know about Evelyn." I sat down, heart pounding. "What is it?" "She's seeing someone else. Victor. It's more than just work. She's been bragging about how he's promised her a life you could never give her. Lavish trips, luxury, everything she's always dreamed of." The words hit like a freight train. I felt my stomach twist, my vision blur. Laura's voice faded in and out as she detailed how Evelyn had confided her plans to leave me once she'd taken everything of value. Apparently, Victor wasn't just her lover but her ticket to a different life, a life where I was disposable. I hung up without saying much. My hands shook as I replayed every moment, every red flag I had ignored. And then came the anger, a slow, burning rage that simmered beneath the surface. I wasn't going to be a victim. Not in this life. The night after Laura's call, I couldn't sleep. My mind churned with questions and doubts. Was it true? Could Evelyn, the woman I had built a life with, really be planning to leave me for someone else? I needed answers, and I needed them now. Evelyn came home late again that night. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she entered the living room where I waited. She was carrying an expensive handbag I hadn't seen before, her makeup still perfect. "Late meeting again?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Victor wanted us to go over some new designs." Victor. The name alone made my jaw clench. "You're spending a lot of time with him, aren't you?" Her eyes darted to the side for a moment, a tell I'd come to recognize over the years. "He's my boss, Mark. It's part of the job." "Is it just the job?" I asked, my tone sharpening, because I heard from someone that there's more to it than that. Her face froze, the mask slipping for a split second. Then she laughed, a sound that grated against my nerves. "Who's been filling your head with nonsense? Laura? She's always been jealous of us." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Are you cheating on me, Evelyn?" She stared at me, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she'd deny it. But then she shrugged, a smirk playing on her lips. "Fine. If you must know, Victor has been more attentive than you've been in years. He appreciates me. He sees what I deserve." Her words cut deeper than I expected. I stood up, towering over her. "And what exactly is that, Evelyn? A life of empty promises? A man who's just using you as a trophy?" Her smirk disappeared, replaced by anger. "Don't lecture me, Mark. You've been content with your simple life, your routine. I want more." More. That single word echoed in my mind. It wasn't just betrayal, it was disdain. She had stopped seeing me as her partner a long time ago, and I had been too blind to notice. "Are you planning to leave me?" I asked, my voice cold now. She crossed her arms, meeting my gaze. "Eventually, but not until I've secured what's mine. The house, the car, everything." It was the confirmation I needed. She wasn't just cheating. She was scheming. I felt a surge of anger, but kept it contained. Then we'll see about that, I said quietly, turning away. Mark, she called after me, but I didn't look back. I went straight to my home office, locked the door, and opened my laptop. If Evelyn thought she could take everything from me, she had no idea who she was dealing with. I spent the next few nights awake, my mind buzzing with a mix of pain and determination. If Evelyn wanted to play dirty, I'd meet her at her game, but on my terms. She thought I was the simple, predictable husband who'd roll over and let her take everything. That's what gave me the upper hand. She had no idea what I was capable of. The first thing I did was call Laura. She'd already betrayed Evelyn by coming to me with the truth, and I needed her on my side. I need details, I said, skipping the pleasantries. Everything you know about what she's planning. Laura hesitated. Mark, are you sure you want to do this? It's going to hurt more than you realize. It already hurts, I replied. But I'm not going to sit back and let her walk all over me. After a moment of silence, Laura relented. She told me everything. How Evelyn had been meeting Victor regularly under the guise of work trips, how they'd been scheming to access our joint assets, and how she was even considering using the legal system to ensure she got more than her fair share in a divorce. She's banking on you being too blindsided to protect yourself, Laura added. Victor's coaching her. He's been through a few divorces himself, and he knows how to twist the knife. The thought of that smug, pretentious man advising my wife on how to ruin me made my blood boil. But instead of letting the anger consume me, I used it. I made a plan. The next step was securing my assets. I reached out to my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Diane who had helped me set up my business contract years ago. When I told her the situation, she immediately recommended putting protections in place. Transfer the house and car into a trust, she said, and make sure your personal savings are shielded. If this goes to court, you want to look like you've been transparent, but you also don't want her to have a direct line to everything you own. I took her advice and moved quickly. By the end of the week, the house and car were in the name of a trust managed by Diane, and I had moved the bulk of my savings into a separate account Evelyn couldn't access. It wasn't about hiding money. It was about ensuring she couldn't manipulate me into giving it up. The final piece of the puzzle was gathering evidence. I needed undeniable proof of her betrayal and her plans to take everything. That's where Laura came in again. I hate to ask this, I told her, but I need you to help me get close to Evelyn. She's more likely to slip up around you than anyone else. Laura agreed, albeit reluctantly. Over the next few weeks, she subtly steered conversations with Evelyn, encouraging her to share her dreams of a life with Victor. And Evelyn, in her arrogance, opened up. She's planning to make her move soon, Laura told me after one of their chats. Victor wants her to drain your accounts before filing for divorce. He's broke, by the way. His so-called wealth is all smoke and mirrors. I wasn't surprised. Men like Victor were all flash and no substance. But Evelyn's willingness to destroy me for a man like that? That stung. I hired a private investigator, Carl, to dig deeper into their relationship. Within days, he delivered exactly what I needed. Photos of Evelyn and Victor together, receipts from their secret rendezvous, and even audio recordings of them discussing their plans. Mark's a nice guy, Evelyn said in one recording, but he's weak. He won't fight me on this. By the time he realizes what's happening, Victor and I will be gone, and so will his money. I listened to those words on repeat, each time feeling a mix of betrayal and resolve. Weak? I'd show her just how wrong she was. By the end of the month, I had everything in place. My assets were protected, my evidence was airtight, and my resolve was unshakable. All I had to do now was wait for Evelyn to make her move. Little did she know, I'd already made mine. Evelyn thought she was in control. That was her first mistake. Her second mistake was underestimating how far I'd go to protect myself. I'd set the trap. Now it was time to let her walk into it. It started with the bank accounts. One afternoon, Evelyn casually suggested we consolidate some of our joint savings into a high-yield account she'd heard about. The account, she claimed, would be for the future. But Laura had already warned me this was Victor's idea. He wanted access to liquid cash, something he could use for a failing business venture he'd convinced Evelyn to help fund. I played along. Sounds smart, I said. Let's sit down and look at the details this weekend. She smiled, her charm on full display. See? This is why I love you, Mark. You're so practical. Her words turned my stomach, but I kept my expression neutral. I had no intention of following through. Instead, I alerted Diane, my lawyer, and Carl, the investigator. I wanted to see how far Evelyn would go. Diane ensured the accounts were flagged for suspicious activity, while Carl kept tracking her every move. By Friday, Evelyn was more distant than usual, spending hours at work or running errands. In reality, Carl's updates showed her visiting Victor's apartment and making frequent trips to a luxury boutique downtown. She was already spending the future she imagined with Victor, confident I'd be none the wiser. The tipping point came a week later when Evelyn sat me down at the dinner table. She wore her polished, professional demeanor, the one she used to charm clients. "Mark," she began, "I've been thinking a lot about us." "Have you?" I asked, my tone calm. "Yes." She reached for my hand, and I fought the urge to pull away. "I think it's time we reevaluate where we're going. I've been feeling like we're growing apart." My jaw tightened, but I forced myself to nod. "I see. And what do you suggest?" She hesitated, then gave me a carefully rehearsed answer about needing space, wanting to find herself, and still loving me but not being happy. It was a performance, every word calculated to sound sincere. But I knew better. "Is this about Victor?" I asked abruptly, watching her face carefully. Her composure faltered, just for a moment. Then she laughed nervously. "Mark, what are you talking about?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "I know about the affair, Evelyn. I know about the stolen money, the plans to take everything and leave me with nothing. I know about Victor's debt and his promises to you." Her face turned pale. "Who told you that? Laura? She's lying." I shook my head. "It doesn't matter who told me. What matters is that I have proof." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, tossing it onto the table. Inside were photos of her and Victor together, bank records showing her unauthorized withdrawals, and transcripts of their recorded conversations. She stared at it, her hands trembling. "Evelyn," I said, my voice steel, "this ends now." The silence that followed was deafening. Evelyn sat frozen, her trembling hands clutching the damning folder. Her carefully constructed facade shattered as she flipped through the photos and transcripts. Her expression shifted from disbelief to panic, and finally to something that almost resembled fear. Where did you get this?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "What matters is that I know everything. And now, you're going to listen." I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "You lied to me, manipulated me, and tried to rob me of everything I've worked for. You thought I'd roll over, didn't you? You thought I was too weak, too naive to notice. But you were wrong." "Mark, she began, but I cut her off. "No, you don't get to talk right now." I tapped the folder. "This is proof of your betrayal. Proof that you and Victor plotted to bleed me dry and walk away together. What did you call me in those recordings? A predictable fool?" My voice grew colder. "Well, who's the fool now?" Her lip quivered, and for a brief moment, I thought she might cry. But then she squared her shoulders, her eyes narrowing. "You've been spying on me," she said, her voice rising. "That's illegal." "I can." "You can what?" I interrupted, standing up. "Go to the police? Tell them your husband caught you cheating and trying to steal from him? Go ahead, Evelyn. See how far that gets you." Her confidence deflated as quickly as it had surged. She slumped back in her chair, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she mumbled. "Victor said." "I don't care what Victor said," I snapped. "You made your choices, Evelyn, and now you're going to deal with the consequences." I tossed another folder onto the table, this one filled with legal documents. "Here's how this is going to work. You're going to sign these papers. They outline our divorce and ensure that you get nothing beyond what the law requires. No house, no car, no access to my accounts. You're lucky I'm not suing you for fraud." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "You can't do this," she finally managed. "You can't leave me with nothing." "Oh, I can," I said, my voice dripping with finality. "And I will. The evidence I have is more than enough to destroy any claim you might make in court. If you don't sign, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you've done." Tears streamed down her face now, but I felt no sympathy. For months, she had schemed behind my back, laughing at my supposed gullibility. Now, she was learning what it felt like to lose. I crossed my arms and stared her down. "You have until tomorrow to decide, Evelyn. Sign the papers or face the fallout. Either way, I'm done with you." Evelyn didn't come out of the bedroom that night. I stayed in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, replaying everything that had led us to this moment. I could hear muffled sobs behind the closed door, but they didn't stir any compassion in me. Not anymore. She had made her bed with Victor, and now she could lie in it. The next morning, I found her at the kitchen table, the unsigned divorce papers spread out before her. Her eyes were red and puffy, her usual confidence replaced by something brittle and fragile. "I don't want this," she said softly, her voice trembling. "And I didn't want to be betrayed," I shot back. "But here we are." She stared at the papers as if they might spontaneously disappear. "Mark, we can fix this. We can go to therapy, work on things. I'll end things with Victor, I swear." Her words rang hollow, like a poorly rehearsed speech. "Don't insult me," I said, my tone sharp. "You had your chance, Evelyn. Multiple chances, in fact. But you kept lying, kept scheming. Therapy? You think that's going to undo the months of betrayal? It's too late." She flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she whispered, "I don't have anywhere to go." That wasn't entirely true. I knew she had Victor, but the idea of him taking her in after this fallout was laughable. He was already floundering in debt, his so-called wealth a mirage. And even if he did let her stay, it wouldn't last. Men like Victor didn't stick around when things got messy. "That's not my problem," I replied coldly. "I've already packed your things. You can take them and go." Evelyn's breath hitched. "Please, Mark," she pleaded. "We've been together for 12 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I thought about it. About the years we'd spent building a life together, the laughter, the shared dreams. But those memories were now tainted, overshadowed by her betrayal. "It meant something," I said finally, "until you threw it away." By noon, Evelyn was gone. She signed the papers without further argument, her signature shaky but present. I watched as she loaded her bags into the back of a cab, her shoulders slumped in defeat. For a moment, I wondered if she would run straight to Victor, but that was no longer my concern. My focus was on reclaiming my life, free from her lies and manipulation. The fallout was swift. Laura kept me updated on Evelyn's downward spiral. Victor, it seemed, wasn't thrilled about her sudden lack of resources. He kicked her out after a week, Laura told me during a call. Apparently, he thought she'd come with more money. The irony wasn't lost on me. Evelyn had pinned her future on a man who saw her as nothing more than a stepping stone. Now, she was left scrambling to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. With Evelyn gone, my home felt different, emptier, yet strangely peaceful. It was the calm after the storm, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I spent the first few days cleaning every corner of the house, removing the remnants of her presence. Her framed photos came down, her clothes packed away, and her clutter replaced by the order I'd longed for. Each act was like erasing her betrayal from my space, inch by inch. Despite the small victories, I wasn't naive. The scars of what she'd done ran deep. Nights were still the hardest, filled with restless thoughts and echoes of her deceit. But I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let her actions define me. This was my chance to rebuild, and I wouldn't waste it. While I moved forward, Evelyn's life took a predictable nosedive. Laura, ever the reluctant informant, kept me updated. After Victor kicked her out, Evelyn moved into a motel on the outskirts of town. She was scrambling to hold onto the pieces of her old life. But without my financial support or Victor's promises, she was floundering. "She called me yesterday," Laura confided during one of our conversations. "She wanted to know if you consider giving her a second chance." I laughed bitterly. "What did you tell her?" "That she burned that bridge the moment she started plotting with Victor." Laura paused, then added, "She didn't take it well. She still thinks she can talk her way out of this." Typical Evelyn. She had always relied on charm to manipulate people, but charm only got you so far when your lies caught up to you. Evelyn's situation worsened as the weeks went by. Word of her betrayal spread through our social circle, thanks in part to Laura and the ironclad evidence I'd shared during the divorce proceedings. Friends who once admired her distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone so blatantly self-serving. Even her family, once her strongest supporters, began to lose patience. She showed up at her sister's house last week, Laura told me during another call, begging for a place to stay. They let her crash for a night, but told her she needed to figure things out on her own. It was almost poetic. The woman who had once planned to leave me with nothing now had nothing herself. Victor had vanished, her friends had turned their backs, and she was forced to confront the reality she had created. Meanwhile, I was rediscovering parts of myself that I'd lost during our marriage. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects and earning a promotion I'd been chasing for years. I reconnected with old friends, went on weekend hiking trips, and even joined a gym. Each day, I grew stronger, physically, mentally, and emotionally. And then, there was Laura. What began as occasional conversations about Evelyn gradually evolved into something more. We started meeting for coffee, then dinner, sharing stories about our lives beyond the chaos Evelyn had caused. She was a steady presence in my life, offering support without judgment. I hadn't expected to feel anything for her, but there it was, something new, something real. As the weeks turned into months, my life began to stabilize. The void Evelyn left behind was slowly filled with things that brought me genuine happiness. Work was thriving. I'd just signed a major contract that would secure my financial future for years to come. My house, once a battleground of lies and betrayal, felt like home again. But what surprised me most was how naturally my connection with Laura grew. Laura and I spent more time together, meeting for dinners, attending events, or just walking through the park. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, filled with laughter and an ease I hadn't felt in years. There was no pretense, no underlying games, just honesty. For the first time since Evelyn's betrayal, I felt hope. One evening, after a quiet dinner at her place, I found myself confessing. I didn't think I'd ever trust someone again, let alone feel this way. Laura smiled, her hand brushing against mine. I wasn't sure I could trust someone either, after everything with Evelyn, but I think we deserve a chance, don't you? I nodded, my heart unexpectedly light. Yeah, I think we do. While I was building something new, Evelyn was sinking deeper into the mess she'd created. Laura occasionally shared updates, though I didn't seek them out. Apparently, Evelyn had gone from one failed attempt at stability to another. The motel she'd been staying in evicted her after she failed to pay her bill, leaving her with no choice but to move in with her mother, a woman Evelyn once dismissed as outdated and judgmental. Her job prospects were grim. After burning bridges in her design firm and being blacklisted due to her reputation, Evelyn was left scrambling for anything to make ends meet. Laura told me she'd taken a job at a retail store, a far cry from the luxury life she'd envisioned with Victor. She still talks about you, Laura said one afternoon as we sipped coffee at a local cafe. She's convinced you'll take her back. The absurdity of it made me laugh. Does she really think that after everything, I'd let her waltz back into my life? She's desperate, Mark. I think she's starting to realize what she threw away. But that was Evelyn's burden to bear, not mine. The final straw came 2 months later when she showed up at my doorstep. It was a rainy Friday evening, and I was unwinding with a book when the knock came. When I opened the door, there she stood, soaked and disheveled, holding an umbrella that looked like it had seen better days. "Mark, please," she started, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I stared at her, feeling nothing but cold indifference. "There's nothing left to say, Evelyn. I made a mistake," she pleaded. "I wasn't thinking. Victor. He lied to me. I thought he was." "Don't," I interrupted, my tone sharp. "You didn't think, Evelyn, because you didn't care. About me, about us, or about what you were throwing away. Now, you're dealing with the consequences." Evelyn stood on my doorstep, Her shoulders slumped and her hair plastered to her face by the rain. For a brief moment, I remembered the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. But then the weight of her betrayal came rushing back, washing away any lingering nostalgia. "Mark, please," she said again, her voice cracking. "I've lost everything. I don't know what to do." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "That's not my problem anymore, Evelyn." Her lips trembled, and tears mingled with the rain dripping down her face. "I made a mistake. I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for it. But you and I had something special, something worth saving." I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Special? You destroyed that the moment you started scheming with Victor. You didn't just hurt me, Evelyn. You tried to ruin me." She shook her head, her voice growing frantic. "I was stupid. I believed his lies. He told me we could have everything we ever wanted, that I deserved more. But he was using me, Mark. Just like She stopped herself, her eyes wide, as if realizing she had said too much. "Just like you used me." I finished for her, my voice cold. "Exactly. At least you're finally being honest." Her sobs grew louder, and she reached out to grab my arm, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said firmly. "You don't get to waltz back here and pretend you're the victim. You chose this. You wanted more, remember?" "I was wrong," she cried. "I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. Please, Mark, give me another chance." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the desperation etched into her face. This was a woman who had spent her life manipulating others, and now, with nowhere left to turn, she was grasping at straws. But I wasn't going to be her safety net. "No," I said simply. "We're done. We've been done for a long time. It's time you accept that." Her sobs turned to anger, and she straightened up, her wet hair whipping around her face. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? Like you didn't make mistakes in our marriage?" "I'm not perfect," I replied calmly. "But I never betrayed you. I never lied to you, and I never tried to destroy your life. That was all you, Evelyn." She stared at me, her anger deflating as quickly as it had come. "Where am I supposed to go?" she whispered. "That's not my concern," I said, stepping back inside. "Goodbye, Evelyn." I closed the door and locked it, leaning against it for a moment. Her muffled cries faded as the rain grew louder. I didn't feel triumph or joy, only relief. This chapter of my life was officially closed. After Evelyn's desperate visit, it felt as though a weight had been lifted off my chest. Closing the door that night wasn't just a literal action. It was a final, symbolic act of reclaiming my life. For years, I had carried the burden of trying to make our marriage work, even as she drifted further away. But now, I was free, and it was time to focus on myself. The weeks that followed were some of the most transformative of my life. I doubled down on self-improvement, channeling my energy into things that brought me genuine happiness. Work remained a steady anchor, and my promotion allowed me to take on new challenges. I reconnected with old friends and found joy in simple things. Weekend hikes, late-night movies, and cooking meals that were no longer met with Evelyn's criticism. Through it all, Laura was there. Our bond continued to deepen, and I found myself looking forward to our time together. One evening, as we sat on her couch watching an old movie, I turned to her and said, "You've been my rock through all of this. I don't know how I would have made it without you." She smiled, her hand brushing against mine. "You've been stronger than you think, Mark, but I'm glad I could be here for you." It was in that moment I realized I had found something rare, a relationship built on trust and mutual respect. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't weighed down by the past. While my life was steadily improving, Evelyn's continued to unravel. Laura occasionally relayed updates, though she avoided dwelling on them for too long. Evelyn had moved into a dingy apartment with a roommate she barely knew and was working long hours at a retail job just to scrape by. "She's trying to reach out to mutual friends," Laura told me one day. "But no one wants anything to do with her. She's burned too many bridges." It was clear Evelyn was spiraling, but I had no intention of getting involved. That resolve was tested one afternoon when she called me out of the blue. "Against my better judgment," I answered. "Mark, please," she began, her voice strained. I just need someone to talk to. I've lost everything. You lost everything because of your choices, I replied. What do you want from me? I don't know, she admitted. Closure, maybe? I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I can't stop thinking about how I destroyed us. Her words gave me pause. For all her faults, Evelyn was finally acknowledging the consequences of her actions. But that didn't mean I owed her anything. You're right, I said. You don't deserve forgiveness. But for what it's worth, I hope you figure things out. Just don't expect me to be part of it. And with that, I hung up, cutting the last thread that tied us together. My relationship with Laura continued to flourish, and soon it became clear that what we had was more than just a rebound. She was kind, thoughtful, and supportive in ways Evelyn had never been. One evening, as we walked through the park, she turned to me and said, "Do you ever think about what's next for us?" "All the time," I admitted. "You've shown me what a real partnership looks like. I want to keep building that with you." We decided to take things slow but steady, allowing our relationship to grow naturally. Laura introduced me to her family, and I introduced her to mine. The acceptance and warmth we received from our loved ones only solidified that we were on the right path. Why now? Evelyn had faded into the background of my life, though occasional updates reminded me of her decline. Laura mentioned that Evelyn had been evicted from her apartment after falling behind on rent and was now living with her mother. She had no close friends left and had been fired from her job for repeated tardiness. "She's her own worst enemy," Laura said. "She blames everyone but herself for where she is." It was a stark contrast to where I stood. I had rebuilt my life, found love again, and regained my confidence. Watching Evelyn's downfall wasn't satisfying. It was simply a reminder of how destructive greed and betrayal could be. 1 year after Evelyn's betrayal, Laura and I stood on a cliffside overlooking the ocean. It was a trip we'd planned together, a celebration of the new life we were building. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I turned to her and said, "You've changed my life, Laura. I don't know where I'd be without you." She smiled, her eyes shining. "You've changed mine too, Mark." In that moment, I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. Evelyn's story and mine were forever intertwined, but they had diverged in ways neither of us could have predicted. While she continued to struggle, trapped by the choices she'd made, I was free. Free to love, to grow, and to live the life I deserved. Laura and I eventually moved in together, merging our lives in a way that felt effortless. The pain of the past didn't disappear entirely, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, it served as a lesson, a reminder to value trust, honesty, and mutual respect above all else. As for Evelyn, I heard she eventually left town, seeking a fresh start somewhere far away. Whether she found it or not, I couldn't say. All I knew was that I was finally free to write my own story, one filled with love, hope, and endless possibilities. The chapter with Evelyn was over, and my new story was just beginning.